Real news for Americans 50 plus. This is Emeritus News Channel. Now a partial replay of the Friday press briefing held by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, explaining an update on the health insurance reform package and what is left to do in the legislative process.
It isn't with a little sadness that I view that it is not in the bill, but in fighting for the public option, which is, I think, a fight that was led in the House, and we had it in our bill, we improved what is going to be in the final product. Because while we may not have a public option, we have the purpose of the public option served by the exchanges and what they allow, by the rate reviews, which we insisted upon, insurance rate reviews, and by saying that insurance companies, should they be raising rates between now and the onset of the exchanges, may be prohibited from participating in the exchanges. So I believe we have a very strong bill that will increase competition, will lower cost for the American people, and accomplish some of the same goals. It doesn't produce the same savings, and that's why we were fighting for it. The goal had to be served. We wanted more savings that a public option would provide, but it did not prevail. What we will have in reconciliation will be something that is agreed upon, House and Senate, that we can pass and they can pass. So I'm not having the Senate, which didn't have a public option in its bill, put any of that on our doorstep. We had it, we wanted it, they didn't have it, it's not in the reconciliation. But it has nothing to do with whether we initiated here. We did initiate it, they didn't.
They're saying that if you initiated, then they will with it.
But, we're talking about something that is not going to be part of the legislation. So why don't we talk about what is going to happen? Because I'm quite sad that a public option isn't in there. But it isn't a case of it's not in there because the Senate is whipping against it. It isn't in there because they don't have the votes to have it in there, or they would have had it in there to begin with. Yes, ma'am, you're next.
How troubling is the ruling that the Senate parliamentarian did yesterday on the president must sign the bill before they can do the reconciliation?
Not very troubling. I mean, it is. It's more of a visibility issue. But the fact is that once we pass the Senate bill, it is enacted. And that remains for the president to sign it. Maybe more on the subject than you want to know, so I know you'll stop me if that's the case. It's important to note that what we are doing is reconciliation. We're dealing with a very few points. Affordability for the middle class, affordability for the middle class, equity for the states to correct the Nebraska fix, closing the donut hole for seniors, and I'm finding out that a lot of people don't know what the donut hole, making prescription drugs more affordable for seniors, and expanding the accountability, the insurance reforms. In addition, on the pay-for side, changing the pay-for from the excise tax to another pay-for. That's largely what is in the bill, and some things that go with that. It all must be central to the budget. Nothing incidental or peripheral to the budget. Central to the budget. That's what it is. The bills that have passed, ours with 220 in the House, theirs with 60 in the Senate, will be acting upon the Senate bill with changes that were in the House bill reflected in the reconciliation. So in order to have the Senate bill be the basis and build upon it with the reconciliation, you have to pass the Senate bill, or else you're talking about starting from scratch. So we will pass the Senate bill. Once we pass it, if the President signs it or doesn't, it's people would rather he waited until the Senate acted, but the Senate parliamentarian, as you have said in order for them to do a reconciliation based on the Senate bill, it must be signed by the President. So it isn't going to make any difference, except maybe the mood that people are in. But the fact is once we pass it in the House, it's going to be the law of the land, and it will officially be said.
We're hearing from so many of your rank and file that they just
They're not,
don't trust the Senate.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. But the fact is that they're committed enough to extending insurance to 31 million more Americans, to making insurance more affordable to the middle class, for having reforms that say that we end the prohibition on denying insurance to those because they have a pre-existing medical condition. They are committed to the goals of the legislation, and they're strong enough to do it regardless of if the bill is signed on Monday or if it's signed on Friday, because we'll have already passed the bill. So,
speaking of the CBO, they came out with their newest budget number that $9.7 trillion would be added to the debt over 10 years. The smallest deficit in that window would be $724 billion in 2014. Do you intend as Speaker ever to preside over a balanced budget like Hastert or Gingrich did, and if so, what kind of time frame would that be?
well, first of all, let us reflect upon where that budget deficit came from. We have two wars that were always done on a supplemental, not paid for. We had the tax cuts for the wealthiest people in our country, which were a very major contributor to the deficit in the Bush years, and now the thereafter. Having said that, it is our responsibility to reduce the deficit, and for that reason, I'm very pleased that the Senate has now agreed to have pay as you go. It became the rule of the House the day I became Speaker. It became the law of the land only recently when the Senate agreed that they would abide by pay as you go. Secondly, the President... excuse me, I'm answering the gentleman's question. The second point is that we have the commission that the President has, by executive order, put forth to take under consideration everything, revenues, expenditures, entitlements, the rest, but to talk about reducing that, and that has a short fuse. That will be a this year phenomenon. And then the President has asked for a freeze or a cut in the appropriations bills as we go forward. So what I say to members when they have an idea or a suggestion for legislation or an amendment to a bill, does it create jobs? Does it reduce the deficit? That is the course we have to take us on. But let me remind you that when under pay-as-you-go, under President Clinton, we came out of the Clinton administration, the last four Clinton budgets were either in budget or in surplus. We're on a trajectory of $5.6 trillion going in the positive direction. After President Bush's reckless economic policies and tax cuts for the wealthiest and engaging in wars that he did not pay for but just added to the deficit, but even before we got all of that, just in a couple of years, the trajectory changed to about $6 trillion in deficit, a swing of about $11 trillion, bigger than has ever happened in history. We know how to turn that around. President Clinton did it following the Reagan-Bush deficits. We have to turn it around now, and that is our commitment to do so. Yes, sir.
On the assurances from the Senate. I realize Leader Reid can't give you ironclad assurances because of the...
Why not?
Because of the rules of the Senate. But what assurances have you gotten from the Senate that they will promptly take up this reconciliation bill to ease your members' fears?
Well, our members have sent a number of bills over to the Senate which have not been acted upon yet. But let me say that is largely because of the obstructionism of the Republicans. They're requiring 60 votes on every bill. As I've said to you before, Senator Reid has had the votes. He just hasn't had the time to address each one of these issues. So the concern that they had was about what has happened in the past based on the 60-vote rule. Under the reconciliation, the simple majority, the constitutional majority, I think members are much more comfortable about the fact that this reconciliation will happen. Nonetheless, there are certain assurances that they want and that we will get for them before I ask them to take the vote. But I think we're at a very good place because our numbers are coming, what we're seeing from CBO is positive. We want it to be certified so that we can go forward with a scored bill as soon as possible. And again, any hesitation anybody might have about do you trust the Senate is offset by the great vision that they have for health care for all Americans, and that we will be able to do it in a reasonable length of time. It will take a little faith, but what we do always does. Yes, ma'am. Can we do one more there? No? No.
Just on timing, you said yesterday that you would give your members a week to look at the legislation.
Well, I said that we would have at least a week from yesterday, before we would have a vote. I hope that we would have the CBO scores as soon as possible so we can go to budget on the beginning of the week and then go on the internet and then take a vote. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you expect the scores today?
You know, it's an independent agency. I wanted them last Friday, and I would hope that we have them today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.